So this cohort of Cornerstone economists received their PhDs in the 60s and 70s, roughly. There's a wide range here. And so I'm going to, the way this is going to go is we will have an opening question for each of the panelists, each of the Cornerstone economists. I'm going to give a brief intro for them in terms of their biography, a very, very short version of their biography. And then I'm going to ask them a question which has been personalized for their experience. They'll go through and 3 minutes for that question. Then we'll have a series of questions related to economics and the profession in general. And then if we get through all of that in the time we have, then we will have questions from the floor, okay? Now, questions from the floor are to be directed to a particular person, okay? So you'll choose the question and choose the person. And without any further delay, I'm going to start with Margaret Sims. Working is the lights just. Oh. Okay. Now, Margaret earned her bachelor's in economics from Carleton College and her master's and PhD in 1974 from Stanford University. She has done research and held leadership positions at institutions including the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies and the Urban Institute, and has served as a policy advisor to the federal government. She was also a member of the Black Enterprise Board of Economists. She received the Samuel Z. Westerfield Award honoring the achievement of African American economists in 2009, the second woman to do so. And so, her question, and we will have just a second, 3 minutes. Margaret, what was going on in the country when you decided to leave academia to work in the nonprofit sector, and how did those events influence your decision?
Well, I would say that I got into economics in part because of the interest in public policy aspects of economics, the war on poverty, for example, and some of the things that were going on in urban areas. But what really led to my move away from academia, when I was a graduate student, I learned, of course, what economics was, and the question was, what could you do with it other than teach? And I would cite 3 opportunities that I had that helped shape my career. The first one, I was an undergraduate student, and I was admitted into a program that was trying to increase the number of people of color in the Foreign Service. And that seemed interesting to me because I was interested in economic development at the time. And so I spent a summer at AID, the Agency for International Development, working with an economist who was trying to restructure Indonesian debt following a change in government there. So that was my first taste of outside academia economics. The second opportunity came when I was a graduate student, and I got an opportunity to be a summer fellow at the Urban Institute in Washington. And at that time, there was the big wave of African American officials going into city government, and so it was an opportunity to work on some things about government services and the provisions to different people. And that led to my dissertation topic. And then the third opportunity was when I became a Brookings Fellow at HUD, and I had an opportunity to work on the first urban policy report in the Carter administration. And so I would say those 3 things sort of gave me a lot of exposure to what it was to be an economist outside of academia. And also, I became involved with the Caucus of Black Economists, where at that time there were a number of members who were non-academics or who were combining academics with engagement in economic development in the communities. And at that time, I was at Atlanta University. Atlanta, the focus of urban development with Maynard Jackson coming in, and a lot of both urban and rural activity going on throughout the Southeast. And that was really an opportunity to see what economists could do if they weren't in academia. And I joined.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, the next Cornerstone economist is Julianne Malveaux. Julianne earned a BA and MA degree in economics from Boston College. She earned a PhD in economics from MIT in 1980. She served 5 years as the 15th president of Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. She is, as a writer and syndicated columnist, her work appears regularly in, and this is an abbreviated list, USA Today, Black Issues in Higher Education, Ms. Magazine, Essence Magazine, the Los Angeles Times, on and on. She appears regularly on CNN, BET, and has appeared on PBS's To the Contrary, ABC's Politically Incorrect, Fox News Channel's The O'Reilly Factor, as well as appearances with Roland Martin and on stations like C-SPAN, MSNBC, and CNBC. She is currently Dean of the New College of Ethnic Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. Julianne, your trajectory as an economist into the public intellectual sphere or space is rare, if not unique. What influenced your decision to move into this space, and would you encourage others, especially Black women, to go in that direction?
Thanks for the question. And I first of all want to thank NEA for inviting me to this panel, because there's so many people on the panel that I look up to or who've mentored me, like Bernie especially, and David Swinson when he comes. So I just feel like I'm not the same Cornerstone they are. I'm corner as opposed to Cornerstone. You know that? But in any case, I've always attempted to express myself wherever I was, not only in academia, but outside academia. I've run for political office, 1984, got my butt beat, but it was fun, and it basically tickled my interest in being more out there. One of the things that happened to me when I was running for the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco is that people would often ask me to break down economic concepts. So literally, I went from running for the Board of Soups to having a radio show on KGO, which is an ABC affiliate. I was on from midnight to 5 a.m., which was interesting. But but it also, I would get fools who saw UFOs because midnight to 5 a.m., but you would also get people who were kind of somewhat serious. On that time, I was on the faculty at UC Berkeley, and they, actually, I was told that I was not a serious academician because I was on the radio. So my first answer to your question is, I don't think that being a public intellectual and being an academic are mutually exclusive. I think that, in fact, if we go by the Du Boisian model, it's irresponsible of us not to communicate with our communities. It's irresponsible for us not to engage and not to be clear about what's going on. And so from my perspective, I think that, and basically those of y'all who know me know I have a big mouth, I'm a wind-up doll. If you give me a microphone, I'm very happy. So I'm glad that there's a timekeeper here. Otherwise, I talk for the whole 90 minutes. But in any, I only have 1 minute. Oh, Lord. But in any case, I think the transition was just very natural. I think the other thing that occurred to me is that at the time that I was tapped by, I was doing newspaper. I was Essence Magazine's first college editor. But I was doing all that stuff. The TV stuff came kind of generically because people had read my work. I would first of all advise all economists who want to be understood to basically make sure that your community can understand you. I have an exercise that I do when I would teach journalism, which is take a paper that you've written, reduce it to 1,000 words, reduce it to 750 words, reduce it to 500 words. Why? 750 is the length of a newspaper column. 500 is a USA Today column. What's the point? If you can't say it in 500 words, you didn't say nothing. You know, I mean, you don't have to put your footnotes in the 500 words. But if you haven't said what you're supposed to say, you can't say anything. Okay, I'm down to my last few seconds. I hope I answered the question.
You have 15 seconds.
I have 15 more seconds. Okay, I'd encourage everybody to do it and publish your work in popular newspaper, popular journals, blogs, because it's really important that people understand us.
Thank you. Okay, the next is James Stewart. James Stewart studied math at Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology, where he was one of only 5 black students in the student body of 1,000. He earned his PhD in economics from the University of Notre Dame in 1976. He is Professor Emeritus of Labor and Employment Relations, African and African American Studies, and Management and Organization at Penn State University. In 2021, he was awarded the Samuel Z. Westerfield Award, for which he will be a recipient this afternoon from this organization. Your question, James, is you have worked with African-centered scholars in disciplines outside of economics. How has this interaction influenced your economics work?
Thank you for that question. My work in economics is integrally connected to my work in African American studies. When I was finishing up my doctorate at Notre Dame, I was invited to become the director of Black Studies at Notre Dame. I hadn't finished my dissertation, and taking on that responsibility, it took me another year before I actually finished it. And throughout my career, I've been jointly associated with African American studies and economics. I moved to Penn State in 1980 as director of Black Studies and assistant professor of economics, and the economics department and I didn't get along very well, so that's when I switched over to labor studies. That's a long story that I won't tell now. But I've also became actively involved in the National Council for Black Studies, and I've been the national president of that organization as well as NEA. And I would say that how it's influenced my work is that I've tried to, at least when I theorize about the economic circumstances of African Americans, it comes from a detailed understanding of the experiences of people of African descent that's derived from my work in African American studies. I've authored, I think, the most widely used introductory text in African American studies, and that's required that I know something about literature, politics, sociology, etc. And when I was in graduate studies, at Notre Dame, I already had my master's degree, so I was able to take courses in philosophy, sociology, law, and so forth that helped me to sort of develop a broad understanding of the parameters and contours of the Black experience. So that's all been involved in what I've done. And I'll stop there so somebody else can have my extra minute.
You got a minute, Dr. Stewart?
Okay. I guess I would simply say that I'm still actively involved in both enterprises. I'm currently a senior fellow at the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School, and the inaugural director of the Black Economic Research Center for the 21st Century. And I'm in the process of completing the total revision of my introduction to African American studies. So they're still integrally connected.
Okay, thank you. Next would be Barbara Jones. Barbara graduated from the University of Oklahoma in 1963, completed a master's degree in economics at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and she completed a PhD in economics at Georgia State University in 1973. Now, she was a leader of the 1958 Katz Drugstore sit-in as a high school student. We'll talk about that. Okay. Since 1971, she has been a professor of economics, department head, and dean at several historically Black colleges and universities. She is past president of the National Economic Association. Barbara, your question is, As a high school student, you were a leader in the Katz Drugstore sit-in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The Katz Drugstore was also a restaurant, and the sit-in was successful in ending segregation in that establishment. Has your activism influenced your economics research, and if so, how?
Okay. Somehow, when I listen to what all of these folks have done, you know, I'm kind of feeling like you, that maybe I am a corners, but as a 15-year-old, I was a member of the NAACP Youth Council. And we were sitting out under the tree at the advisor's house in August. And it was, needless to say, hot, et cetera. And Sam Cornelius, who had returned from Wichita, Kansas, told us about a sit-down program that they had done with a few people in Wichita. And Ron Walters, by the way, some of you know him, was one of the persons who had participated in that. And we said, hey, why don't we try this? And Katz Drugstore was the only Sunday night establishment in downtown Oklahoma City that was open, you know, on Sunday night. And so we decided to go there, and we would start. And that actually changed my life, because even though I was working with the NAACP, I did not understand or be committed to the matter of trying to change the plight of African American people. And one of the major issues there, of course, was the economic situation. But by the time we finished in that activity, other places that not only with Katz, but desegregation, really all of the eating establishments in downtown Oklahoma City, and then when movies, and it was a really transformative experience for the city, but it was also very much a transformative experience for me. And my interest in economic issues flowed from that without any question, because I worked then nationally with NAACP. I continued to work in anything that was related. There was an NAACP Youth Council chapter that opened at the University of Oklahoma, and there was no question I would go there. When I got to Illinois, there was another chapter. I joined that one, and by the way, met this dude I've been married to for almost 60 years. And but all of this, it simply gave me a focus. And when you talk about what's going on racially with black folks, and I'll talk about that later with some of these issues, they're basically economic. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are other things that happen, but they are economic, and they therefore, my life was influenced very much, totally, by that experience.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. Next is Charles Betsy. Charles graduated from the University of Michigan in 1968 with an AB in economics and Spanish literature, and a PhD in economics in 1976. He is Professor Emeritus of Economics and former interim dean of the Graduate School at Howard University. He is also a former president of the NEA. He has served in research and policy positions in all three branches of government, including the Office of Economic Opportunity, the U.S. Department of Labor, the Congressional Budget Office, National Urban Coalition, National Research Council, and the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which I imagine is the justice, the court part of government. Your question, Charles, is you are involved in research in the field of research in the field of forensic economics. That work involves understanding bias in damage awards, which I suspect is a rare avenue of research. What led you to that field of research, and would you recommend early career economists to consider the field?
Thank you for the question. The field of forensic economics involves applying economics to legal questions, and those are sometimes quite straightforward to sometimes quite complicated. What I guess the way I got involved in the field was that I was leaving the U.S. Sentencing Commission on my way to Howard University, and I happened to get a phone call from an attorney who said that he was looking for an economist who could compute damages in a I think it was a wrongful death case. And was I interested in that? And I said, well, I've never done that before. Let me consult with someone and see what would be involved. And I had a couple of colleagues who were economists who had done work on legal cases from time to time. And one of them was an associate from the Urban Institute who gave me a reading list, basically, and a list of books and cases that he had used. And I took the case on and completed it, and by word of mouth, got other assignments and so forth. In answer to the question of whether I would advise young economists to get involved, I say yes if you're interested. I mean, there's so many things that economists do and can do and do well. This is only one of them. There certainly is a place for black economists and economists of color in that field, in the field of forensic economics. I'm a member of the National Association of Forensic Economists, and there are much less than, I think, 3% of the membership is people of color. So that in terms of economists who work on their own, economists who work exclusively as forensic economists, there are plenty of opportunities for African American economists to engage in that work. And so, yes, I would recommend it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And last is David Swinton. David earned a BA in economics at New York University, master's degree, and doctorate in economics at Harvard University in 1975. He is president emeritus of Benedict College. He was awarded the Samuel Z. Westerfield Award by the NEA in 2005. In 2007, he was inducted into the South Carolina Black Hall of Fame. He was the first research director at the Black Economic Research Center from 1971 to 1973, and was responsible for planning, organizing, and managing a small research effort which focused on studying the economic status of minorities. David, your question is, you were president of Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina for 23 years. How do you feel your economics training in the areas of research prepared you to be the leader of an academic institution, and what motivated you to move into administration at an HBCU?
Well, I apologize for being late. I can't get around too much anymore, and that elevator that's supposed to take me up here was out of service, so they had to drive me through all the inner guts of this hotel to get me up here. I think economics training is good training for any pursuit that you want to do that requires logic and critical thinking, etc. I hadn't started out to be in administrations. As a matter of fact, like most economists, I didn't have any respect for administrators. I figured they didn't do much of anything. But as I went around to my various things I did, I found that as an administrator, I could have more influence and more power to actually cause things to happen, which require more than logic, but require also the ability to get resources, et cetera, and so on. I always thought that HBCUs should be more influential in changing their communities. And so that was one of my big goals. I wanted to set an example for other HBCUs for how to improve the community around us, how to improve our institutions, how to get the resources we need. And I'm blessed that I was fortunate to do all those things at Benedict. And so my training was very valuable. All of my experiences, and I think all of everybody's experiences, determine who they are and what they're able to do. And so I got into economics almost like Barbara. I was not planning to be in economics. In fact, I started out, I wanted to be a sociologist, then I wanted to be a philosopher, then I decided at each one of those interests, they didn't have the ability to impact the African-American economic condition. And I think that's my bell.
Right now, you have 1 minute.
55.
I got a minute. Okay. Okay, so I settled on economics, really. And I haven't regretted that decision. It gave me the ability to have impact both through research and writing, and both through working with politicians. And I've had the good fortune to work with presidents and vice presidents and governors, giving them a perspective, because I was always interested in equity and improving the circumstances of African Americans. I was never really out for myself. And so I always wanted to have an impact on the community and the world around me.
Okay, thank you. And I misspoke when I said that David Swinton was last. Always going to be last because of a dictate from him is Bernard Anderson, who has said that he's always first by last name, so he will be always last today. So Bernard received a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics, graduating with highest honors from Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina, a Master's of Arts in economics from Michigan State University, where he was a student of Arthur Bremer, and a PhD in business and applied economics from the University of Pennsylvania, 1969. He is a Whitney M. Young Jr. Professor Emeritus at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where he was the first African-American tenured professor. He was an Assistant Secretary of Labor during the Clinton administration, and he was a member of the Board of Trustees of Tuskegee University. He was awarded the Samuel Z. Westerfield Award in 2003. Bernard, your question is, given your varied career in which you have worked in academia at the Wharton School, in government at the Department of Labor, and in the nonprofit sector at the Ford Foundation, how has this variety attributed to your understanding of economic theory and policy?
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to take an extra 20 seconds, Nina, to say that I commend the NEA and you for organizing this session honoring the 100th anniversary of Black economists. I knew Sadie Alexander, but I knew her and her husband, Raymond Pace Alexander, as lawyers, not economists. Mm-hmm. I had no idea that Sadie Alexander had earned a PhD degree in economics at the University of Pennsylvania until I read the excellent book written by Nina Banks. And so I have some legacy, I think, with Sadie Alexander. I am the 7th African American to earn a PhD degree in economics from the University of Pennsylvania, earning that degree 48 years after Sadie Alexander earned her degree. But let me say this in response to your question. I never aspired to a career in academia. I became strongly interested in pursuing economics as a career as a result of the influence, mentorship of my former professor, and mentor and good friend Andrew F. Grimmer, whom I met when I entered graduate studies at Michigan State University. He was one of 2 black professors in the economics department at Michigan State. The other was Alfred L. Edwards, also a graduate of Livingstone College, who earned a PhD in economics at the University of Iowa. I developed an interest in economics as a boy when I accompanied my grandmother during her Saturday shopping visits to the 9th Street Italian Market in Philadelphia, famous open-air market. While there, and I don't know why this was of interest to me, but I noticed that white people had more money than black people. And they spent their money differently than black people. When a white person would go into the meat store, they would identify the type of meat they wanted, indicate how much they wanted to buy, and they would buy it without asking the price. Black people, on the other hand, would always ask, what is the price of this or that or the other thing? And I found that interesting. I also noticed that black people tended to concentrate in the Giordano's chicken shop at 9th and Washington Avenue. Relatively few white people were found in the, I got 56 seconds, so let me. Let me, I might comment on that part of it, but when I went to Livingstone College, the counselor we had to meet with asked, what do you want to major in? I said, I came here to get a degree so that I could get a white-collar job. She said, well, I need to know more. She said, what are you interested in? I told her about this story of the difference in white and black. So she said, well, if you're interested in that, you need to major in economics. That's how I came to major in economics. And it became a lifelong interest in studying racial inequality in American economic life. My career is more diverse than that of any of my colleagues, all of whom I love and have worked with over my career. But that is because I have been seeking a solution to the problem of racial inequality in American economic life. It is broad, it is deep, and it is persistent. And it is the bane of the existence of black people in this country. I'll stop there, and I might have more to say as we go on.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll go to a round of questions that I will ask, and then all of the members of the panel will answer. I will try to vary the order, except for Professor Anderson will always go last. And this is what we've all agreed to, so this is the way to go. Now, my first question is, let me find my questions. Okay. What do you think are the 3, at least one, most important issues facing the black community needing research from black economists? Let's go in order of seating. Professor Swinton.
Sure.
And this is 3 minutes.
The most important, I don't know that there's only one most important issue, but it's really very important for people to be committed to making a difference and making a change, and to be committed to thinking outside of the box, and be committed to actually seeking real solutions. I think we need to have greater respect for ourselves, greater respect for our intellectual abilities, and greater belief that we should be the solution for our problems. And that can be done. You know, when I went to Benedict, for example, they were falling apart. The buildings were boarded up. They were living in the middle of a ghetto. There was drug houses all around the college. There was prostitutes up and down the street a couple blocks from the college. We cleaned all of that up. And it's because I knew we could do it. And so the greatest belief is blacks need to believe in their own ability to make change happen that they need to happen. So I think that's the biggest issue, belief in our own ability to do what needs to be done, etc. I was in South Carolina, you know, they had the Confederate flag flying on the top of the State House. I organized an 80,000 person march to the State House, and that's been taken down. It was a room-sized Confederate flag in the chambers, and we got that removed. So I think you have to believe in your ability to accomplish things. And when you do, when you talk to people, you can persuade and influence them to change.
Yeah.
Another minute, okay? If I can think of something else.
You can yield back and save it for another time.
You can save it for another time. I'll add that to another time if you
All right.
Okay. need. Okay. So next is Margaret Anderson.
Margaret Sims.
Margaret Sims. Okay.
Giving away Charles's wife.
And she wondered who that was.
I'm sorry?
All right, so you wondered who that was.
There's only one Anderson on the panel.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll start in the way David started, which is a more general question about what the issues are facing black economists. And that is, how do we convert good research into practice? That often, as researchers in an academic setting in particular, that you find the problem, you define it, and then the question is, how do you help policymakers get to the right solution? How do you find what is effective, and how do you convince them that it is not only effective but cost effective? And then I'll just throw out two specific issues that may or may not be any agreement on the panel. One is community development and housing. And I raise those not just because they're issues that we have had concern about for a long time, but as cities become more important again to the broader society and the broader economy, how do we preserve and improve places for African Americans and other people of color in the development or redevelopment of communities? In a lot of places we see displacement. In a lot of places we see neglect in some sections and overinvestment in other sections of cities. And those, I think, are some issues that economists could address, and black economists with a particular focus on what is important. The other issue, of course, is jobs. How do we identify places as the economy changes and as job opportunities shift to make sure that African Americans not only move into the things we used to think were the wave of the future, but maybe leap over those into where the future is in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. How do we plan for the next generation of African Americans to be where the jobs are 20 years from now, not where they are 20 days from now? And I'll yield back my 38 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Just to remind us of the question. The question is, what do you think are the three, at least one, most important issues facing the black community needing research from black economists? And Barbara Jones is next.
Okay. I learned something over the Christmas holidays when my offsprings were were home. And that is, there is a new website that's called openai.com. And that is quite fascinating. And so I put in there what were issues affecting the African American community. And I came up with poverty, wealth, income inequality, employment issues, gender, etc. Education. All of this is economic stuff. And so it really comes down, and everything that's been mentioned, we can get into specifics related to all of these issues. But somebody said something on the panel that I think is very important. I think we have to do the work that is of interest to us. And that's really, really crucial. And I think that our lives tell us what are some of the things that are important. When I was ready to write a dissertation, I read an article that was discussing the factors that influence the decision of black women to enter or not enter the labor force. And as I read the article, I'm like, that's not right, that's not true. And I ended up doing work in that area of the difference between the decision to enter the labor force participation rates for blacks versus white women and so forth. And I think that's really what comes down. And where you live, like when David was talking about looking at the community where his college was located, and he saw there what were concerns, what were issues, what was going on there, and then began developing programs. But somebody else would look at it and say, well, let me do research that is related to these problems. How do we solve them, the public policy? How do we go from here? And I think that for individual economists, it really becomes a matter of what do you find that's interesting? What is fascinating? What's something that you think is being done or assumptions that you think are incorrect? And therefore, you want to work on those issues, change those patterns, and how is this, and as you read the literature, how are they searching for this? How are they finding answers? And you say, well, that doesn't work. Well, that's not true because this has this assumption and this is not the case. And therefore, I think it becomes, what do people want? What is it those people want to learn and want to understand better?
Thank you. Next would be James Stewart.
First, I want to riff off of something that Julianne said earlier about how we communicate with other constituencies. And in addition to what she pointed out so succinctly, we need to support the review of black political economy. So we need to do the research, and we need to make a conscious choice to submit the work there. If you were to look at my vita, you would see that most of the things that I've published are actually in the review, and that was conscious because I wasn't really interested in communicating to the larger audience about what I was writing about. I was trying to influence policy and other scholars to take up some of the issues that I was talking about. With respect to the specific question, I, of course, since I come out of the employment area, employment is absolutely a critical issue. And I'm particularly concerned with the role of artificial intelligence that you mentioned, as well as automation. A few years ago, I did a study for the California Black Legislative Caucus about the impact of automation in the future on employment. And there are probably 400 different occupations that are subject to tremendous transformation in terms of the levels of employment, and we need to be looking at that issue. The second issue I would suggest that we need to take a look at is what is going to be the impact of the end of affirmative action on employment, because it's coming. Again, I look at politics in addition to economics, and that's clearly on the drawing board. So we need to be thinking about how we can minimize the negative impacts associated with the change in those public policies. The third issue that I'd raise is I think we need to start doing more work in terms of looking at issues of reparations and restitution and what are the optimal ways in which those particular proceeds ought to be distributed or utilized to improve community development, and what are the optimal ways in which those decisions ought to be made, and that ought to be done in cooperation with persons in other disciplines. Now, I'm a interdisciplinarian or a non-disciplinarian, even though my training is in economics, and I would encourage all of us to think about collaborating with our colleagues in other disciplines in order to develop more holistic and fruitful investigations and research. I still have 25 seconds to yield back.
Thank you. Next, Charles Betsy.
Thank you. So I'll go back to the question, what are the one or three most important issues facing the black community needing research from black economists? And I would put it in a broader context. Like several of my fellow panelists, I see myself as an economist, but broadly speaking, an economist. I was gratified that economics is a social science. I continue to see economics as a social science and not a mathematical science. And therefore, I think that economics involves and should involve the use of other disciplines and other and concepts from other disciplines. And so I see the most important issue being most broadly the issue of social justice and civil. By that I mean civil and human rights, equity in the criminal and civil justice systems, issues of gun violence, poverty, and housing issues really plague the black community, and I think that black economists have a role to play in helping to solve those issues. A panelist in one of the sessions yesterday, and maybe it was Jamie, and said that his area of research a few years ago was not considered economics. He was talking about violence, police violence, and so forth. There are issues today that are being studied that could not have been studied in top academic departments 10 years ago, 15 years ago, because faculty would not sign on to that and would tell you that if you wanted to study that, you need to go elsewhere. There are issues now that need to be studied, that we need young people to be trained to study and be persistent in studying to help alleviate the problems that I think have been long-standing in the black community. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Next, it's Julianne Nova.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bad boy has attitude. Don't take that out of my time. Technological
I haven't
issues.
started yet.
Thank you. Okay. I think there's a broad question that black economists have to raise as we talk about the work we do, which is what is the role of economists and economics in constructing an alternate world view. In other words, we can do a long list of things that are wrong in the black community. We can talk about poverty. I mean, everyone has listed some of them. If we do what we've been doing, we're going to get what we keep getting. Our research is often, the way we were taught is that everything had to either be an extension of or reaction to something someone else has done. Very rarely are we allowed, in terms of academic pedagogy, to say, I'm going to write about X. That's not connected to anything. But if we keep connecting to what is, then we'll keep getting what is. And we don't necessarily want what is when it has all these inequalities baked into it. You know, and so racism is part of the cake baked called America. It's inside that cake. And what is our role in basically not slicing the cake differently, which is distribution, but crumbling the cake and finding a better recipe for cake. So I think that that's something that we just need to keep thinking about as we think about our role. We're not supposed to just be clones of white folks, frankly. We are the most creative people on the planet, and we should use that creativity in our research. Now, a lot of my time lately has been involved in reparations. I'm a member of NARC, which is the National African American Reparations Commission. I testified on June 19, 2019, in front of Congress on the reparations issue. The reparations movement is growing, but I'm very disappointed that President Biden refuses to date to sign an executive order to implement H.R. 40. And as many of you know, that John Conyers, since 1989, every year introduced H.R. 40. We thought we were very close very recently, but we didn't. We couldn't get it through. And now we have those fools who prevailed yesterday. And therefore, we're not going to get reparations legislatively. But what is exciting is that there's a young sister out of Evanston, Illinois, Robin Ruth Simmons. Okay, I got to rush. But anyway, Evanston, Illinois is the first place to do local reparations. I'd like to see economists in various other cities connect with the reparations commissions to talk about how to do it. Hers is not perfect. 16 families got $25,000. And they're going to keep doing the weed money. It's the weed money that they're using for the reparations. That's an appropriate source of reparations money. The other thing, and very quickly, we have to think about alternatives to predatory capitalism. Our system is about predatory capitalism. It's about extracting surplus values, and they kept extracting our surplus value. The prison industrial complex is a profit center for somebody. And we need to look at that, research that, but I just say we need to look at alternatives to predatory capitalism. Very quickly, if I have one more second, we also need to look at the relationship between policy and outcomes, between public policy and what outcomes we get. Margaret talked about housing, talked about gentrification, but we can also talk about differential educational opportunities. What is the relationship between public policy, and we need to pay attention with that man as the Speaker of the House. He says he's going to cut your Social Security. I'm getting old, so I'm concerned about that. Public policy and outcomes. That would be, I've used up my 3 minutes and probably David's 28 seconds.
Thank you. And last is Bernard Anderson.
Thank you. I will be brief.
Yeah, right.
Three questions. Number one, research that shows why the black unemployment rate remains at or near the twice the unemployment rate for whites over the entire spectrum of the business cycle. Why is that the case? Number two, research to determine if reparations for American descendants of slaves would contribute to stable, balanced growth. And number three, research that shows how an institutional research paradigm will enrich and deepen the search for policy solutions as compared to this overemphasis, my dear friends, on quantitative analysis and numbers running. Our panels yesterday were excellent, but they were all focused on quantitative analysis. I will tell you, my dear friends, that is not good enough for identifying policy solutions to balance economic growth and the deep, persistent racial inequality in American economic life. I'll stop there.
He's got a minute and a half.
Let me
Give it to me.
You've got over a minute, Bernard. Let me ask you a follow-up question, because you just said that the quantitative analysis is not good enough. It is, of course, what economics programs require.
Yes.
If it's not good enough, how do we change the dynamics so that other types of research are accepted as economics within those departments?
Well, one of the problems here is that in order to get ahead in the economics profession in academia today, you must focus on quantitative analysis. That is a critical part, incidentally, of the Summer Institute for Minority Students in Economics, which, let me say, I will say unabashedly, that in working with Marcus Alexis when I was the program director of the Rockefeller Foundation, The Rockefeller Foundation, not the Ford, I work for Rockefeller, not Ford.
Thank you.
The Rockefeller Foundation was the first foundation to provide financial support to create the Summer Institute for Minority Students in Economics. And they would not award the grant to the National Economic Association. That was Marcus's. I'm one of the founders of the NEA. This is the caucus of black economists, the first part of it, organized in 1969 at these meetings in New York, in room 1427 of the New York Hilton Hotel. Charles Eve, I won't go into that. The thing is this. Quantitative analysis is not the only framework for analyzing economic outcomes. There is an institutional analytic framework that can be very helpful, and I argue that developing and pursuing the institutional approach will add to our ability to identify policy solutions. You won't get policy solutions simply running numbers. Now, there's nothing wrong with running numbers. It is rich, it is interesting, it is challenging, as the papers yesterday showed. I mean, I commend you. I was thrilled to see black economists, some of whom were joined by white economists in writing the papers, taking the lead in running the numbers. It's beautiful. Heteroskedasticity. My God. I mean, it sounds good. What the hell? How will that lead you to a policy solution for economic inequality? That is what we should be focusing on. I'm not
Bernard,
saying give up.
as an institutional economist, the check is in the mail. As an institutional economist, the check is in the mail. Thank you for
Yeah, I'm an institutional economist too. I mean, look, we all have to do the numbers to get to PhD. You have to go through all of this stuff, and I did that mainly at the University of Pennsylvania, at Michigan State. That was not a major emphasis, but at Penn it was. And I struggled. I will be frank with you. I struggled to get through it. Struggled hard to get through it, but I was glad to get through it so that I could get on to the institutional approach.
Okay, thank you.
But anyway, that's my view of the matter.
Okay, our next question will be, what do you see as the current challenges to early career black economists and black students working to become economists, either in academia, public service, or elsewhere? And what advice do you give for overcoming these challenges? Let's start at the other end with Juliana.
Good question. Well, I think that the tendency of academia to force early career economists to cut and paste their interests to become more acceptable to the majority is a career challenge. Many black folks come into economics, I know I did, because I was interested, kind of similar story to Bernie, in how come white people had all the money and black people did not, basically. And my mom was a social worker, and she would bring stuff home, and I'd look at it and say, how come this family got this much of an allocation? And she didn't. She would say, get out of my paperwork. But, but it was clear that, that drew me in. I think many of us are drawn in. We may be interested in some of the other stuff. We're also interested in inequality. But when you have some of these, I've advised several students, PhD students, not because I'm that good at it, they reach me out and say, can you help me with whatever? And dissertation committees are often not open to what black students want to write about. Mm-hmm. And in addition, tenure committees are often not open to what black folks want to write about. And so I think that that's really a career challenge in terms of how you cut and paste yourself. I don't think you should cut and paste yourself, but if you want tenure, and let me be clear, I ain't never got tenure from nowhere, and I'm okay with that. But if you want tenure, there's some cutting and pasting that you may have to do, and I think that's a really big challenge. I think the other challenge is often isolation. I mean, when you have black faculty in econ departments, there may be one of y'all. And the isolation is emotionally crippling, frankly. And I just advise young folks that your department and your dissertation and your early career is not your life. Find you a church. Find your sorority. Find somebody that you can have non-academic conversations with for two reasons. First of all, you need the emotional support, but secondly, you might get some ideas from them. You get some ideas, and so I think just basically, if you are African-centered, Afro-centered, you will often find resistance to the work that you want to do, and you need to figure out ways to get around that. The other thing I would say to folks is that challenge can be ameliorated by looking for campus allies, people who will basically have your back. I just wrote a support letter for a faculty member in the English department. Now, I have a doctorate in economics. I don't have a doctorate in English, but whatever. The dean of the College of Ethnic Studies saying this is a vital part of our community made a difference. I believe she's moved up a level. She hasn't been promoted, but she moved up. So find campus allies who can have your back. Do not live in isolation. There are people sometimes you might think they can help you, and they absolutely can. So don't cut and paste. You can't be anything if you're not true to yourself. You really can't. That's, at the end of the day, you will, the Paul Laurence Dunbar said, we wear the mask that grins and lies, that hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. Don't wear that mask.
Okay, thank you. Next would be Charles Betsy.
So frankly, this is the only question that I thought you might have missed on, because you're asking this group, this panel of Cornerstone economists, what are the current challenges for early career?
Point taken.
Having said that, I agree wholeheartedly with what Julianne just said, which is that it's really important for early career and students, early career economists and graduate student economists to have a support system, to have people you can depend on, to have allies, because it is tough work becoming an economist and being an economist and succeeding, particularly if you're looking at how, as a black economist, you can help change the situation of racial inequality in this country. There's resource constraints are the challenges that I would mention, and so one of the discussions that I have with close family members sometimes is about the preparation and persistence issue for economists. It really is important to, if you are a student in economics or an early career person in economics, to be persistent. You have to be able to maintain your equilibrium. You have to be able to maintain your focus and continue to pursue the objectives that you have in mind. And that is helped if you have a backup system, if you have a framework and basically a reason to move forward. Like others on this panel, I'll just say briefly, like others on this panel, I did not plan on becoming an economist. I thought I was going to be a Spanish teacher. That's why I majored in Spanish to begin with. And then I took an economics course. Luckily, it was intro to macroeconomics, because I think if I started out with intro to micro, I would not have become an economist. But the macro course that I took answered some questions that I had about what was going on in Michigan and Detroit specifically at that time with the so-called Eisenhower recession, the recession of 1958 that devastated the Michigan economy and threw lots and lots of our neighbors out of their jobs. And so I was, when my intro to econ professor put up the macro model, and I said, oh, well, there's the answer. I at least thought that was the answer at the time. That's what drew me to economics. And since I started out in Spanish, I didn't want to give it up, and so I had a double major in economics and Spanish, but decided to continue in economics. But persistence, I think, is probably what I would urge on early career and graduate students in economics.
Thank you. Next, James Stewart.
I'm going to defend your question. Even after I so-called retired, I was still writing letters in support of candidates that were going up for tenure and promotion. So, and many of the issues that they were facing were the same ones that I faced. I had one of the nastiest tenure battles that you could imagine, but which I won't talk about here. But the point is, it's really important to build a network of people that you can count on to write the letters for you as you move through your evaluation process. And it's also important to look for, as Julianne pointed out, allies in other areas that can support you. I served on PhD dissertation committees for African American students in every college at Penn State except for one, and we have 12 colleges. You know? I was on dissertation committees in art, engineering, agriculture, and my people ran away from agriculture in the 1920s, so I don't know anything anything about that. But I think these issues that we faced, our generation, are the same ones that you face. I think they're issues of where you publish and how it's regarded. There was one case that I wrote a letter for, and I won't mention the institution, for somebody, and they had the nerve to write back and say, well, what's his research impact? And I wrote back and said, what's yours? And mine was better than theirs, so it was so you have that sort of detailed level of scrutiny where they look for opportunities to deny you as opposed to looking at ways to affirm you and to help you develop, so that you have to look at ways of developing that type of network outside of your department. And I don't think you should expect that you're going to get much support internally from the department, because they don't understand the type of issues that Charles was talking about in terms of family background, persistence, resources, and so forth. So you have to build that external network. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Barbara.
I'm going to have a lot of time to give up because you guys have made all the good points. Yeah, but when the question itself was raised, I could not help but say, this is the answer to the question that was being raised yesterday afternoon and talking about the HBCUs. Why is it the number of students who are choosing to major in economics is declining? And as that number declines, it declines in terms of the number of programs, because we don't have enough students who are graduating. And then we talk about, well, who are the ones who are going on to graduate programs? And what is the problem there? I think the problem is what is just said. They come into economics because of an interest in economic issues. Then the way we approach to answering the questions related to those issues turn them off. I had a student who was, when I was at Clark, who was our #1 student graduating, went on to graduate study in economics, very excited about it and so forth. But then she said, I'm not taking any economics courses, all I'm taking is math. And she dropped out of the program, the graduate program. So I don't know the answer, except for the kinds of issues that you guys have raised there about how do you address it, how do you get people through these programs. But that is the issue. People who are interested in issues of wealth, poverty, employment, et cetera, are not the ones who are math majors. And they're not interested in becoming math majors, and it turns them off. And I think that, I don't have the answer, but I think that's the question.
Thank you. Next.
I'd like to pick up on some of the things that people have said, and I'll use some personal examples as a way to illustrate the point. It's certainly the case, and increasingly so, that in the economics profession, there's a set way in which you're supposed to acquire certain skills and the way you're supposed to use them. What is valued within the profession. And if you have an interest that's broader, or you have an interest, for example, in institutional factors that Bernie said, things that are, in quotes, less valued now, then you need to be an advocate for yourself, and you need to find a mentor who can help you. And I think on a couple of examples that happened to me in graduate school. I was in a program that required 6 specialties. More than any other department. So in addition to macro and micro, I had to have 4 fields. And I was sort of perplexed because there were just, how do I get the number in the areas that were of interest to me? And I was talking to a student who was 2 years ahead of me, and he said, well, what I did was I created my own 6th field, and I put it together around some issues that I was concerned about. He was in labor. And I was interested in urban, but there wasn't really an urban field at that time. They put together an urban field just out of some old courses. They retitled them. And so I went around the university and found courses that I thought I could apply. And then I had to be an advocate for myself. I did something in political science, I did something in the business school, I did a practicum in the School of Engineering, which was about designing the city of San Francisco for the year, and you're really gonna know how long ago it was, for the year 1990. That was the future at the time. And so that was one thing I had to do. The other was my dissertation. I was interested in resource allocation within a particular jurisdiction. It was sort of followed on my Urban Institute experience. And I was perplexed as to how I would find somebody within the economics department. But fortunately, I knew Hank Levin in the School of Education, who wrote on that issue. And he became my advocate by being the second member of my committee. And I always knew that when I sent something to my advisor, then Hank would send a copy of his comments to my advisor, so that that's what helped me get through when my advisor did not have the right perspective on the issue I was interested in. I think that's something that young economists need to do. I'm going to get my 36 seconds back. And it's incumbent on us as established members of the profession to reach back the way Jim talks about it, identify people who are not being protected, promoted, encouraged, and take it upon yourself to be that person for them.
Thank you. Next, David Swinton.
Okay, first I want to make a point about a question that's passed already. I don't think the issue is quantitative analysis. I think the issue is what we're doing with quantitative analysis. And so I just want to make that point. Now, I think young people, old people, whatever kind of people, they have to learn how to advocate for themselves. And as somebody said earlier, they have to be persistent. When I went to NYU, I was the only black major in economics in the whole school, the whole time I was there. Okay, I did my dissertation on something they didn't want me to do it on. And I persisted that that's what I wanted to do it on. When I told them, and the reason I did that is because I was originally going to do a dissertation on trade unions in West Africa. And I read Gary Becker's book about the economics of discrimination. And I said to myself, this is all lies. This is not true. This has nothing to do with discrimination. So I decided I would do a theoretical dissertation, which, as somebody already said, they didn't want you to do that. They wanted you to test somebody else's theory with some econometric stuff. But I went to at that time, my advisor, who didn't end up being on my committee, and I said, I want to write about the economics, do a dissertation on economics of discrimination. I got two groups I want to write about, Group B and Group W. And so he said, but I got some money I can get back too. But he said to me, you can't do that. If you want to do discrimination, you need to do the case against the Aleuts and the Eskimos. And I said, why can't I do it? He said, because you can't be objective, writing about blacks and white. Now, I never told him I was writing about blacks and white. I told him I was writing Group B and Group W. But I said, you know, it seems strange to me that a member of Group B can't be objective writing about discrimination, and a member of Group W can. And so he backed away and gave up on that. But I found throughout my career, I had to do things that I believed in. I didn't let people tell me I couldn't write on this subject. Now, it's true that when I was at Stony Brook, and I was doing a lot of writing on racial issues, and my dean told me, you can't do that. You need to write something about regional economic development, et cetera, and so on. And you know, I continued to write on racial issues, but to be honest, I did do a couple pieces on regional economic development as well. But I think you have to insist that you have a right to write on what you want to write on. You have a right to pursue different, because I think our big problem is, when I was at the Southern Center for the Studies of, we did a lot of research on other people's writings about labor, the causes of inequality in labor. And we found out that all of that stuff was wrong, and they came to the conclusions themselves that this didn't explain the things, but they still kept doing it. Because what I discovered, they were not looking for the truth. They were looking to rationalize the system that existed. And they were looking to prove that this was a competitive, and we're not looking to prove that. And if you're looking to prove that, you're never going to make any advances on the situation of confronting African Americans in this country. So, and by the way, you can do what you want to do. You just need to be a strong advocate, and you need to be able to defeat the arguments people raise up against you. And unfortunately, I was fortunate because I was always able to do that.
Thank you. We have half an hour or so, and I do have some other questions.
Did you miss Bernie?
Oh,
Oh, no, he did his first.
yeah, no,
Sorry.
no.
No, he was last.
No,
He's
he's
always
always
last.
He used his time.
Yes, thank you.
I will be brief. In answering this question, the question here about the challenge that you face, the challenge you will face depends upon where you are. And that means that we are now in a different environment than we were in when all of us started out our careers in economics. We are now in an environment of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the paradigms for the challenge black economists will face now will come from being in that DEI environment rather than the environment that we were in when we came along, which is 3-4 decades ago. Now, what are some of the ways of facing this? Number one, I believe you have to work to identify new insights for understanding old problems. And let me give you an example in my case. When I was coming along, one of the major questions related, essentially a labor economist, was the impact of the minimum wage. Whenever a recommendation would be made to increase the minimum wage, some Republican would say we shouldn't do that because it will worsen the employment situation for black youth. I knew that was arrant, patent nonsense. And so I did some research to show that that was not so. And what I was able to demonstrate is that when you adjust the data and change the definition of unemployment, you can explain why unemployment is much higher for black youth than for others, and the reason is discrimination against black youth. In March, listen to this now, in March 1976, the third story on the Walter Cronkite show was that University of Pennsylvania professor reports that the rate of unemployment for black youth is a stunning 64%. That put me on the map nationally as an expert on labor economists and so forth. And in May 1976, I was awarded tenure by the Wharton School. They valued their faculty members having a national reputation, being recognized nationally for something that introduced new insights for understanding old problems. But that has made a damn bit of difference in increasing the minimum wage. Minimum wage has been increased now for 14 years. And you hear the same arguments, you see. Well, if you increase it, you're going to make it worse for that's arrant, that's nonsense. But you have to be persistent. Don't let other people define you as an economist. You are, and if you earned a degree, you're an economist. Don't let others define who you are and what you are, but be persistent in identifying new insights for explaining and understanding old problems, and you will get ahead in your career, whether you are in academia, whether you are in government, whether you are in financial sector, the private sector, and so forth. Be proud of being an economist. Economists are the smartest people on this earth. And be proud of that. And speak up and speak out when you have an opportunity to do so. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to modify the agenda. Rather than going with the preformed questions, I'm going to open it up for questions from the floor. So direct your question to a particular person, and they will have 2 minutes for your question. Okay? So you can just stand or raise your hand. I'll call on you. If there are no questions, I'll go with the preformed question. Yes?
Yeah, so it's hard to direct this to one person, but since Barbara said already she doesn't have the answer to this, I want to continue. I guess I'll ask Juliet. Continue on this vein of how do we change this system, and what I mean by this system in terms of how we prepare the next generation, right? So yesterday in the HBCU session, along the lines of Purdue's and students, it came up that we trade off how we prepare our students for grad school in terms of the math for the types of topics and other types of approaches, for example, qualitative that we don't do, but perhaps perhaps should be doing, right? But we traded off that we're not preparing students well for that next stage. So my question to you is, how do we, I know this is a big problem, but how do we solve it? If you had a magic wand, and there's one thing you could change, what is the thing you would say we would have to change? And who would have to change it? Is it just us? Is it also the top institutions in terms of, right? So, yeah, I know it's a bit of a big question.
It really is, but I think that the intersectionality, I mean, Jim talked a bit about intersectionality before. That's one of the things I think we have to look at with our young people. I think Margaret talked about creating her own degree. So, I mean, I think, frankly, it's not answering your question, but it's what David has said, I think what Bertie has said about percent, Charles has said, I think all of us. You know, we cannot cut and paste ourselves to deal with other people's expectations. And what I find is that increasingly the economics profession is evolving, and we have to be more active in the evolution of the profession. In other words, Nina, what was that group we were at something day before yesterday that Derek Hamilton is involved in? And it's not just straight economics, they're looking at issues of generosity and how that works, what's ideal. So we have to continue to push the envelope. At the same time, I think that we should be far more active in mentoring our young people, talking to them about what they can do and what we're prepared to help them do. And we have to be bold and joyful. Let me say this. When we hear about economic problems and what's going on, it's easy to basically become despairing. Joy is a form of Black resistance. And so whatever else we do, we must encourage them to remain joyful, and we must deal with our joy. When you get a paper published, when you give a talk, when you encourage that joy. And then imagination. Kumba is the sixth principle of Kwanzaa, creativity. We have to always encourage that creativity. We're not going to change Harvard or MIT. MIT doesn't know anything but how to crunch numbers, and I'm an MIT alum. But number crunching is what they like to do. That crunch the numbers and come up with something better than the number crunching. And it's entirely possible to do that. Structures change, but they change slowly. And so we have to persist in changing them. And I think there are a number of people who are doing that kind of work to be expansive. Derek, I think, is doing really great work. There are some others who are doing really great work that doesn't just rely on the narrow definition of what economics is.
Okay. Margaret would like to add to this.
I would like to add this, and yes, you can only cover so much in your curriculum, and I think that one of the ways in which you could enhance student experiences is by developing relationships with organizations that would provide them with that experience of policy analysis. Bernie made reference to the movement for DEI, and DEI is, you might almost say, infecting organizations outside of academia, where they're all looking for ways to be realistically engaged in DEI and in cultivating young scholars. So if institutions can develop relationships with organizations that are looking to provide summer opportunities or opportunities just post-college for students to get engaged in policy research, that would be a way of, you could say, expanding your curriculum without having to choose your own resources.
Thank you. Jim Stewart wants to add on.
I don't think we should despair. If you look at stratification economics, that's a subfield that was created by us. And it is not simply having an impact in terms of the curricula at a lot of institutions that are now looking for stratification economists, but it's also international. There are a number of international journals that have now published pieces on stratification economics, and they have to cite us as the progenitors of that particular sub-discipline. Mm-hmm. So we can use our creativity and reframe issues in ways that are significantly different than they've been addressed. So, and there are a lot of other areas in which we can do that other than stratification economics. But so I think we've already demonstrated our capabilities of doing what we've talked about.
Okay. David Swinton.
I don't know how many of the young economists and I'm not talking about the ones the ones already out here, work for HBCUs. And how many of them choose to go to HBCUs? If you're the only faculty member at your institution, or one or two in the economics department, you're not going to change very much. They have you there for diversity. We need to think about creating another economics. This economics is false. It's not really, and it's been that since the beginning. There have always been schools of thought who was trying to promote the rich folks, and the schools of thought that were socialists, whatever. When I did my dissertation at Harvard, I challenged the notion that Becker introduced, that the reason blacks were not treated right was because white people didn't like them. It was bad taste. And I said, this is crazy. Everything in economics except race is supposed to be based on profit and pecuniary gain, et cetera. And so I wrote a dissertation that said, no, this is just a strategy for whites to maximize their position in the labor market.
Come on.
It's a strategy to get profit. And, you know, that was challenged. I was helped out by Kenneth Arrow, of all people, because I got in a big argument with Thomas Schelling, who wanted to reject my theory and et cetera. And we went on and on and on and on, and finally he said, well, listen, if you can't accept this, I'm going to throw the whole thing out. And I was fortunate that Ken Arrow spoke up and said, oh, I don't know about that, Tom. I see several dissertations topics in what he's writing for my students. People will, if you believe in what you believe in and you can prove it, now you got to work hard. You got to really know all that stuff and be able to show that that stuff is irrelevant to what you want to write about. So NEA is a good tool, all right? Because those of you who are at these institutions where you're only one or two people and all they want to do is econometric equations, you need to join with each other and try to change the paradigm. We need a paradigm shift and a paradigm change in economics in order to be able to deal with the issues and the problems that we're trying to deal with.
Okay. Bernard?
I'd like to add a personal experience that I think is enormously interesting. My doctoral dissertation advisor, who was chairman of our department, was a man named Herbert R. Northrop, who was the most anti-union, conservative supporter of every conservative cause you could think of. But he was the one who earned a doctorate in economics at Harvard University in 1944. What do you think his topic was for his dissertation? The Negro and organized labor. He wrote that dissertation under Sumner Slichter, and Herb Northrop was a research assistant to Gunnar Myrdal when Myrdal was conducting research for the American Dilemma. Now, when I arrived at the University of Pennsylvania in the PhD program, Northrop learned that I was interested in black employment. He arranged for me to have research support from a grant that he received from the Ford Foundation to conduct a series of studies of what? Negro employment in American industry. I selected Negro employment in public utilities because that was the only industry that Myrdal had not studied. And when you do a dissertation, you have to do something to support it. That is how I broke new ground as a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania. And by the way, My first job as an economist, you're talking about early careers, was an economist for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. While there, I wrote a study of Negro employment in the federal government. That was my first article published in a referee journal. So you have to break new ground when you start your career. Seize on something that is of enormous interest to you, make it your own. Barrel ahead, burn a barn, be bodacious, as Adam Clayton Powell used to say. Don't let other people tell you what to do and the framework. Be your own person and pursue persistently something that is of great interest to you, making a contribution to that field in that way.
Okay, thank you. Let me give a thought here that it seems that with Jim Stewart's advancement of the idea of stratification economics being our field, we get to define what that field is. And if there are issues in terms of how the mainstream wants us to define our problems, we get to decide in stratification economics how we define our problems. And because it is has a JEL classification, it's an accepted field, no one can say it's not economics. Okay? So that's the camel's nose under the door for those who are interested in dealing with the problems that affect our communities to use to do the work that they want to do, define it the way we want to define it. Okay.
Linwood, I want to,
Yes.
there's a question that you sent to us, and you're not going to get to it. So I
Go
just
ahead.
want to say something very brief about it. You
Yes.
ask about how can we enhance the effectiveness of our economists who are in public spaces.
Right.
You and I had a conversation offline specifically talking about the Fed and the fact that we have two black members of the Fed.
Right.
Economists have to be advocates for fellow economists. When Lisa Cook was up, some of the racist BS that came out of some members of the United States Senate's mouth was absurd and ridiculous. They tried to she was a left-winger theoretically, whatever. Anyway, I'm part of a group called Win with Black Women. We must have sent out hundreds of letters to various members of Congress, like, back up off the BS. I'm trying to keep it clean, y'all. But anyway, we can be advocates. So economists who are in public places need to have those folks who are judging them hear from us about how we value those people, why we think their contributions are important. And actually, I wrote a letter to some white man, and I said, if you want to find left-wing economists, call me. Lisa Cook is not a left-wing economist. But in any case, I just think, the advocacy piece, the work we can do, I mean, we've heard people talk about the attack on affirmative action, so many other things. We must be the ones to speak up for ourselves. If black economists don't speak up for black economists, nobody else will. So I just want to put that out there. They can't change the way, they can change the way the Fed works, but I think that we just need to surround them. And some of the criticisms that some people, that we give each other are inappropriate. Karen Bass, our mayor in LA, as an example, got the Black Lives Matter criticizing her because she would not say defund the police. Well, excuse me, you either want a rich white man who's gonna take your property, or you want a sister who refuses to say, she didn't say she wasn't gonna do it, she just wasn't gonna say it. So we have to be very, very measured in our criticisms. Some of these criticisms have to happen behind closed doors. But I was really dismayed at some of the criticism, especially that Lisa got. And I think that when we see this kind of thing happen, we have to be the ones to step up. And NEA can do that as well. NEA can say, we are an organization in, whatever our number is, black economists representing this many more black economists, and we strongly object to the way that you've attempted to characterize this woman.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh.
We did. We mobilized in support of phenomenon.
Okay. We have time for one more question. I see two hands. I don't know whose hand went up first. Okay. Yes. Could you stand, please, and project? Yeah.
I was actually going to address the questions that Julian, but happy for anyone to answer.
Just bring it out there and everyone answer.
So I'm just curious for your thoughts about sort of bridging the gap between the early career struggles and also sort of the struggles of trying to support the next generation of Black students of color. I'm one semester in to tenure track, and I've been asked to be on a million committees. And my white counterpart, who's hired me, I keep asking him. Nobody's asking him to do anything. And I know that it is a good thing for a lot of these committees to have a faculty member of color to better serve students. I'm not at HBCU, but my university has a very large Black student population. And I want to be able to support my students, but I also know that I'm going to be judged.
Yeah.
My productivity is going to be judged against him, and so I'm wondering what advice you all have.
You have to be the steward of your time. You cannot be on every committee. The fact is that if you're a Black faculty person at a predominantly white place where there are a lot of Black students, people are going to pull on you every kind of way. And you've just got to say, talk to your department chair. Which committees do you think I'm most effective on? So you want some committee service, and students are going to need you. But what we've done, one of the things we have at Cal State LA is a student success committee inside the College of Ethnic Studies, and it's ensuring that we do what we can to promote student success. What I found out, I've been there a year and a half, is that advising was not effective for our students. So basically, I had a fit with somebody about hire some more Black counselors so that our faculty are not the only ones who are counseling students. But you are the steward of your time. It's a resource. They're not going to judge you by how many students you serve. They're going to judge you by what you published. So talk to your department chair. If you have a senior Black woman on your campus that can advise you, or senior, which committees am I most effective on? Where can I make the most big splash? And then Bernie said something, you want to get known on campus for the work you're doing, and then you don't have to do everything. They will say, Professor so-and-so is great at this. So just be the steward of your time, because at the end of the day, they look at everything, including your campus service, but you know that your academic props are what they're going to give the most weight to.
I'd just like to add to that. I agree with everything Julianne said, but you're going to have to work harder than other people. There's no way around it. You're going to have to work hard if you want to accomplish many of the things you want to accomplish. I was at Stony Brook. I was on every committee imaginable, probably. But what I found out there is that they didn't care about the African-American students they brought in. They were just bringing in, and this was a long time ago, they was just bringing them in for diversity. And they had it in their mind that they were going to flunk out. So you had to do something. But you just have to, they used to tell us when we were growing up, you have to work twice as hard if you're a Black person as anybody else to get ahead. And that's still somewhat true.
Yes.
Well, I disagree somewhat, David. You and I are dear, dear friends and have been for longer than either of us would say. But this notion of just working harder
Work smart.
is not all that's involved. It's the kind of work you are doing. It's not just working harder, it's the kind of work you are doing.
Bernie, you're not disagreeing with me. I didn't talk about that. I know you have to do the work that you have to do.
Yes.
I'm just saying you're still going to have to work harder as you're doing that work, because you're going to have more things on your plate than other people.
Barbara has a hand up. I want to let her jump in.
Yeah, I thought about something when, Angela, when you made your comment. Yeah, I was thinking about how do we get African-American students who are already in economics to go on and go to graduate school or something there. But what I didn't comment on, that's another thought, is the idea of taking STEM students who are in STEM, not because they particularly like it and want a career, but they have gotten scholarships to do that, et cetera, to help them understand the value of economics as a career. And I think that can happen. They can have good test scores in math, they can do all of that, and then they can also raise the expectations of the traditional econ majors to do the math, because they can understand that people who look like them and talk like them with their backgrounds can, in fact, learn math. And I think that's an issue that I didn't raise that I should have. Thank you very much.
Yes, James?
I resonate totally with the issue that you raised. Just two quick examples. Almost the first day that I moved onto the Penn State campus, an African-American woman student came up to me and said that she really would like some advice and some assistance. And I told her, well, I'm just moving in. Could you come back in a week? It was her senior year before she came back. So we really do have to be sensitive. On the other hand, I was also asked to be the advisor for one of the black sororities, and that was a little beyond my.
Let me see if I can add something. At UMKC, we have a large doctoral program. We have very few faculty, and what I have suggested, and I've implemented on my own, is instead of advising students individually, that I advise students collectively. I have areas of expertise. And instead of spending an hour a week for 10 students, what if I bring all of those 10 students together and spend 2 hours a week going over the same topic, because it gets very repetitive. They want to know the things that I have expertise in, and I repeat it 10 times? No, 1 time a week for all of those who are involved, and they can move forward. Not working harder, but working smarter. Okay. Okay, I think we are 3 minutes. We've got 3 minutes, so we have room for one question and a quick answer.
So yesterday I had the opportunity to moderate the panel on HBCU's economic departments and their future. And the topic came up about the paradigm shift. How are we able to better prepare black students who have interest in these issues? And one of the solutions was, what if we write a textbook that focuses on issues that black economic students would help better prepare them to come up with their own solutions. And I have been obsessed with this idea since it came up. And I just would like to know what topic, maybe what chapter would you include in such a textbook? Maybe stratification economics, maybe discrimination other than Becker, right? So what topic do you think, or what chapters do you think would be important for a black economics textbook?
Before that answer, can I ask you, do you have the time to be the editor for this textbook?
I'm a little busy.
Okay, so we need someone in that role, okay? But, yes, thank you. Okay, who wants to jump in?
Stewart has
James, okay.
Well, of course, stratification economics, but more than a chapter. I think that stratification economics is really a way of framing the entire landscape, and the chapters that would be part of that could be traditional topics, but looked at from a stratification standpoint.
I think it's a great idea, sister, and I'd be willing to do a little bit of work, not a lot, because I'm always overwhelmed. But I think it's a great idea. I think obviously employment would be something that you would include. I think that the whole issue of gentrification and housing would be included. The whole issue of land loss, we've lost 90% of the land we had in 1910. The wealth gap, and what has happened with that. I mean, you know, we had in 1880, we had $36 for every $1 white people had. By 1910, that had reduced to $16 for every $1 white people had. Now it's like between $7 and $10. So we made more relative progress between 1880 and 1910 than we made between 1910 and now. That's amazing. And we might want to look at some things like that. The whole issue of structure, and I would have a chapter in there on predatory capitalism and the way it oppresses black people. So I gave you about 7 to 8 chapters.
Okay.
But I think it's a brilliant idea, and I
Margaret?
think that it's something that if it were an NEA project, we might be able to get it funded and also get that book into classrooms.
Yes, yes.
I think, I agree with you 100%. That book is needed. I had a conference at Benedict where I brought together all the black economics departments. And they were all looking for an alternative paradigm that they could promote to help solve problems. I didn't follow up on that, but I think that's a very important suggestion.
See, one thing when that Jim was saying there, I don't think it's a matter of if you're going to teach a course and give credit for an economics course in a regular, say if you're talking about introduction. I think what we do with examples can be very, very important. When you have a Gini coefficient and you talk about differences in income among different groups, put in black-white. Or you can put in some other things. And I think it's like when you talk about where do we teach African American history? And they say African American history is African American history, vice versa. That in every chapter, in every topic, you use examples about the black experience, about difference, and the kinds of issues that are there. And then the students will have the background and have the economic concepts, but at the same time, they will understand the importance of what is going on in terms of the African American experience.
I would just follow up on that and remember that one of the examples that I would use in my principles of economics course, the macro course, for the consumption function, is to look at Marcus Alexis's work on black consumption and look at the black-white comparison, and students really got engaged in that. So it's just another example of being able to find ways that you can look at research by black economists on topics that are relevant to the topics that you're dealing with in your coursework.
Okay, thank you. I think it's always a good conference when you end up with a to-do list of things to do, so we have a to-do list. I want to thank the Cornerstone Economists for their wise, for their wisdom. I want to also thank Nina Banks for timekeeping, but also this event was her idea. So I want to thank her for all that.